Thank you.
Our shirt's still
That
there.
turns all on its own, huh?
Our shirt's still there.
It'll track him wherever he goes.
Well, we'll get this thing started. I very much appreciate you coming to this reunion. When you're older generation, we used to do this every 2 years, and now it's just Jimmy Fay and I that are kind of left of that generation, and Joyce, who isn't here. But this next generation, I want you to know of your great heritage. We have something very special in our family that no one else can say. You have more blood-related Texas Ranger ancestors than any family in Texas. Now, how do I know that? 5 years ago, I was invited to be the speaker at the former Texas Rangers Association annual banquet at the Briscoe Center in San Antonio, and I announced that, thinking that there'd be others say, "Oh, I've got 30," but since then, I have found 3 more. So we have 27 blood-related ancestors who were Texas Rangers,
Wow.
including the very first ones in 1823. And the first Texas Ranger to ever die in the line of duty was one of our great-great uncles. So we've got a lot of history going on there, and I appreciate that you're interested in it. I'm writing a new book. I'm always writing a book, it seems. Going to be called Silver Stars and Six Guns, which is going to be a history of our Texas Ranger ancestors. I've written a lot of books, and I have stayed away from family. Now I'm going to get into our family story. When I was a little boy, my grandmother, who is most of y'all's great-grandmother, her great-great-grandmother, she had a series of books written by somebody named A.J. Sowell, S-O-W-E-L-L. I couldn't put that connection together, but at 12 years old, she told me that that was her great uncle who wrote all these histories of Texas. So if you get a chance to go to a bookstore or Amazon online or whatever, and you just type in the name A.J. Sowell, lots of books will come up that he has written. Texas Ranger history, early settlers of Texas, the life of Bigfoot Wallace. Any of you heard of Bigfoot Wallace?
Oh, we hear about Bigfoot Wallace all the time.
Well, your great-great-uncle wrote his biography, and biography of, the history of Guadalupe County, history of Fort Bend County. Anyway, my grandmother had these books written by him, and it kind of inspired me to think that one of our ancestors had a part in writing Texas history. On my mother's side, I learned when I was a teenager that one of my ancestors had killed Wyatt Earp's brother. And then 2 days later, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, killed him. So I've got all these Texas Rangers over here and this outlaw killing Wyatt Earp's brother over there. And I have
A
been...
lot like my ancestors.
Was that at the OK Corral?
No, the OK Corral was...
How is everybody's phone going on?
The OK Corral was fought on October the 26th, which is coming up pretty quick. In 1881, my ancestor killed Morgan Earp in March of 1882. And then 2 days, if you saw the movie Tombstone, any of you saw that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, the guy that was playing pool and gets shot, that's Morgan Earp. My ancestor killed him. He was trying to kill Wyatt Earp, but the bullet missed, and that's another story. But anyway, I've been into history all these years, and it motivated me to become a high school history teacher. And I know we're getting ready to have another high school history teacher over here before very long, which I'm excited about. But this is a preliminary work. It's very minor compared to what a book will be on all of our Texas Ranger ancestors. But I've made 15 of them, which I think is only going to maybe be one per family. And if we have some extra, we'll figure out how to divvy them up, but someone would volunteer to, Trevor, thank you, hand those out, and, someone to hand these out. And if you'll be so kind as to take one per family. Here.
I guess you're
I'm covered. I got in on the very first part of that.
And one, you guys back there, there's one for each family. Now, on the genealogy charts in here, I put them together for all of our ancestors and then down to me, and then it goes to my kids and my grandkids, because I want to show you how you can change those charts for your particular family, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But as you'll see on the title page, it's a brief history of my blood-related Texas Ranger ancestors, Sowell, Tumlinson, Nichols, Turner, Steele, and Tanner. All of those are early Texas Ranger families. Now, I'm not going to read to you who and what are the Texas Rangers, but I wanted you to have that so you could see where we fit in. And our earliest Texas Rangers were the Tumlinson family. That's not a real common name. If you run into a Tumlinson, they're probably one of our relatives. But in 1823, Stephen F. Austin put together the first ranging company. And one of our Tumlinsons was one of those first Texas Rangers. And then I said he was the first Texas Ranger killed in the line of duty. The map is just to show you, I've darkened in the area for what we call the DeWitt colony. Green DeWitt brought in 300 families in the 1820s. Most of them came from Missouri and settled in what became Gonzales. And you can see that there were other colonies. The Austin colony is probably the most famous because of Stephen F. Austin. But Texas was settled by Caucasians through this colonization system. And everyone that came in one of those colonies had to convert to be a Catholic. And he wasn't letting any Protestants, the Mexican government wasn't letting any Protestants in. So whether you ever practiced Catholicism or not, it didn't make any difference, but you had to declare that you were a Catholic in order to be able to settle in one of these colonies. Now on the next page, I start out with what I call my Sal genealogy, and it's a 2-page thing. But I want you to see our Sal ancestry goes deep back into Virginia and North Carolina. And the first Sal that came here is at the top of the right-hand column. And that's old John Sal, who was the blacksmith that repaired this cannon that now is known as the Come and Take It cannon. And he made the shot that fired the first shot in the Texas Revolution. And I think that's pretty significant. And I'm pretty proud of that. And so I carry this flag around and kind of let people know that I have that connection. I hope you're as proud of it as I am, because Texas might not be Texas had it not been for what happened at Gonzales with that Come and Take It cannon. Now the strange thing is he had 2 sons who are both our grandfathers. How does that happen? Well, one of his sons had a daughter, and one of his sons had a son who married. So that's where some of the insanity of the young family comes in. But the oldest son, John Newton Sal, he had a son who married Asa Jarman Lee Sal's daughter. So if you go to the next page, you will see that I have a column for our Sal's from grandfather number 1 and a column for our Sal's grandfather number 2. But you know what that means is we have fewer ancestors than most people.
Related.
Well, true. The first one there that they called Jimmy Sal, he was known as the blacksmith of Seguin. He had the first blacksmith shop in Seguin. And he had a daughter named Rosie, who was my grandmother's mother. And she's buried at San Geronimo in Seguin, where most of the Sals are buried. And her tombstone has been broken in half for over 100 years. I just had it repaired, and a new one placed there. The old one that was broken is now encased and laying flat on the ground. She died in 1886, I believe. And then there's a new stone there that gives a little bit of information about who she was. Well, it needed to be done after that many years. But my grandmother and your dad or your mom's grandmother is Lily and Ollie Steele, who married into the Young family. And so that's how most all of us have our Young ancestry. Yes, that's my Aunt Ella and my Uncle Jimmy, and that's your grandparents. Now, where you will want to go to work is where I have put my dad and mother and my name and my children's name. You would replace my dad, Roy Bethel, with James Franklin, your grandfather, who married Mary Ella Southern. And so that's where you'll change the genealogy chart to be your genealogy chart, and then list under that yourself and your spouse and your children and your grandchildren.
Roy,
Yes.
Papa's mother, we called her Danny. Do you stay with them?
Yes. Your grandfather, Jimmy Young, his mother y'all called Ganny. And Aunt Ella, your grandmother, you called her other mama. Other mama. Okay, that's the Southern family. And
He's not Papa's mother?
he was Ganny. She was Ganny.
Okay, that's Papa's mother.
Yes. The one that you called other mama was
Nanny.
your
Yeah.
grandmother's
Nanny.
mother. And I'm not a Southern. I'm on the Young side.
I was just wondering about Danny, which one is Danny?
Okay.
So is
Yeah,
Danny and Nanny?
Ganny is my grandmother and Travis's grandmother.
So which one is she?
She is Lily
Lily?
and Ollie Steele.
Oh, okay.
That's the one you called Ganny.
Okay.
Roy,
Uh-huh.
were those extras, or those?
Oh, yeah. Didn't know we had extras. If anyone didn't get one, might as well hand down the extras.
Yeah, I'll take one.
Okay, now what I have done on the next 4 pages, in 2015, some of you joined me at the San Geronimo Cemetery in Seguin and over at Gonzales, and the Texas Rangers put up memorial crosses for 4 of our ancestors.
See, she has one now.
And their stories are written here. I'm not going to go into them, it'd take all day to do that. But this first one, John Sowell, he is the blacksmith of Gonzales who repaired this cannon and made the first shot that was fired in the Texas Revolution. So that's that first page on the Sowell family. On the next page is an uncle of ours who was at the Alamo. He was not killed at the Alamo because 2 days before the Alamo fell, he was sent out after beef and to recruit more men to come in to fight against Santa Anna's
That
army.
was the dangerous mission.
It was a dangerous mission, yeah. In fact, he did it twice. The first time he went out and recruited men and got supplies and got them into the Alamo, and then they sent him out again with a fellow named Bird Lockhart. You may have heard of Lockhart, Texas. There's no Sowell, Texas. There's barely a Sowell street in Seguin. But this Andrew Jackson is our uncle, who was a courier from the Alamo. And he's pretty important to me and our family because he's considered a survivor of the Alamo because he was sent out to, by Travis or Bowie, I don't know exactly who sent him out on that mission. Now the next 2 pages are our grandfather, the 2 brothers, John Newton Sal, called John Jr., and Asa Jarman Lee Sal, the 2 brothers who had children who married as first cousins. And we descend therefore from 2 brothers, which is kind of an unusual thing. The first 2 pages was written by a cousin of ours, Gary Humphreys, over in Del Rio, Texas. And then I wrote the next 2 pages, and we handed that out at the ceremonies in Seguin and Gonzales. And some of you were there. I know Sandy was there, Debbie, you were there. Who, I don't know, who all else, any of the rest of you at that Texas Ranger thing? Well,
We went up to the cemetery, was that it?
yes, at the cemetery. You and Mark? Well, that's what those 4 pages were originally designed for, and the first 2 pages were written by that cousin of ours at Del Rio, and then I wrote the next 2 pages. I might say just a word about Asa Jarman Lee Sal, our grandfather. He was the mayor of Seguin. He was the Chief Justice of the Guadalupe County Court. He was, for 1 term, the Sheriff of Guadalupe County and held nearly every office that you can have in Guadalupe County. And I'm pretty proud of that because you probably already know Seguin sets on our land. The Sal property is where Seguin is now. And I was glad to hear that we still have some family living in Seguin. I think that's pretty important for, 200 and something years later that we still have family living there. But that's who Asa Jarman Lee Sal was. Now the next thing that I have put in there is a history of the Gonzales Come and Take It cannon. And you may have heard of the Old 18. That day, facing the Mexican army on one side of the river were just 18 men because everyone else was serving, all the other men were serving somewhere in the battles that were going on against the Mexicans and the Indians too. And they're called the Old 18. What is kind of odd about this cannon is one of our ancestors, James Tumlinson, is the one who took it to Gonzales. And then our other ancestor, John Sal, is the one who repaired the cannon. So we have 2 sides of our Texas Ranger ancestors who were involved with that cannon, which is kind of special, I think. Interrupt me at any time. I've talked about this many times. I may skip something that you want to know about. The next page is just about who the Old 18 were. Some more about the Come and Take It cannon. Years later, several men wanted to say, well, I was involved with that. I was there when that cannon was fired, or I was there when the shot was making that cannon. A fellow named Noah Smithwick wrote his memories of going to the Sal blacksmith shop and helping put that together. So I wanted to put his story in there too. And then on the next page, he says the Sal's had a blacksmith shop in Gonzales. And he tries to put himself more in the forefront, kind of like old timers would do. No matter how important or unimportant their role was, when an old timer told a story, they were right there at the top of the list, you know. And it couldn't have been done without me. But there's a little community called Smithwick between Seguin and Luling. You may have passed through it, not even thought about it, because about all that's left now is a cemetery there, but that's that Smithwick family. The next page is our Tumlinson genealogy. Are you familiar with the name Tumlinson at all? Is that even a name that you've ever come down with in history? Well, we had a great grandmother named Mahalia Tumlinson. And I got to checking into her genealogy and found out that her dad and her uncle were two of the very first Texas Rangers. So we have those uncles through the Tumlinson family who were among the first. And then over the years, many Tumlinson men were in the Texas Rangers. If you look at the top of the right-hand column is where our Youngs come into the Tumlinson family. With my grandfather's daddy, William Jack Vernon Young, who married Martha Ann Goodson. And that's our connection to the Tumlinson family. Now again, as you come down and get to number 8, that's where you would put James Franklin Young and Mary Ella Southern. Number 9 would be my generation, where Johnny and Travis and Opal and Louise all would be listed where my number 9 is. And then number 10 would be your generation. Pardon?
Would you say 8, what?
That 8th generation is where you would put Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Ella. James Franklin Young and Mary Ella Southern is your 8th generation in this family. And then Travis and Johnny and Opal and Louise, Fred, and who am I leaving out? Pardon, Edward. Oh, please don't tell me.
He knows already.
He already knows. Anyway, all of that would go in at number 9. That would be your parents' generation. Then your generation is number 10, where I have my 3 sons. And then your children will be the 11th generation. And if you have great-grandchildren, they would be generation number 12. And does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, but I don't think there's enough paper here for all my.
Well, you have to add another
You're gonna
page.
have to get your own paper.
Oh, it's blank on the back.
That's my mother.
Were they related to the Stillwells in West Texas, like Howie Stillwell?
Howie Stillwell, yes. Yeah, if you are familiar with the Stillwells down in the Big Bend, Hallie Stillwell, her husband Roy, was on my other side of the family.
That's incredible.
Yeah, Hallie Stillwell.
She was so.
Yes. Yes, she was the Terlingwood Chili Queen one year.
That's right.
He's a Terlingwood boy, I think. But now, does that make sense? I don't want to leave there until you know where you fit in on that page instead of me. Since I'm your mother and dad's first cousin, you'll know that that's where they go, number 9. And your grandparents, Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Ella, are number 8. You are number 10, and then your children number 11, and so on. If you need any help with that. And the reason I did it this way is I want you to see how you're going to fit yourself in where I am on these pages.
After your name, it says no middle name.
I have no middle name.
What is B for?
Well, that's a long story.
We're all here.
I have no middle name. My dad's,
to the point.
my dad's middle name was Bethel, and my mother said, we're not naming this baby Bethel. Well, my mother's middle name was Bernice, and my dad said, well, we ain't naming him Bernice. So all I have is a middle B. And the reason most everyone in the family calls me Roy B, Uncle Jimmy had a sister, Maggie J. She had no middle name. She thought it was great that I had no middle name and started calling me Roy B, and so that's how it has come down today.
That's important for us to know, because everyone wants to know what B is. Now, we just say Bethel. Just say Bethel Bernice.
I didn't care for Bethel, but I sure didn't want Bernice. But on my selective service draft card, they put in parentheses, I period, O period. So it says initial only. But I showed it to someone and they said, your middle name is Bio? But anyway, that little bit of history now you have. Okay, the next page is the Nichols genealogy, and in a little bit, I'm gonna read you a story out of this journal of James Wilson Nichols. He too was one of the early Texas Rangers, and he's our great uncle, but he's also our great step uncle. Now, would you like to know how that happened?
Right up home.
We had all these intermarriages, but his daddy died. Now, wait a minute.
If you can tell us in front of kids.
Yeah. His mother died. Wait a minute. Yeah, his mother died. And on the Sal side, John Sal died, and those two widows and widower married. So our grandfathers are also our step-grandfathers, and our uncles are also our step-uncles. And it's a whole convoluted thing, but I'll share a story with you there. Anyway, that's our Nichols family, and I've done the same thing on it that you'll want to do on yours. Where my dad's name appears, where Uncle Jimmy will go, and Aunt Ella. Where my name and Charlotte's appears, where your name will go, and so on down. And then we have the Turner genealogy. Also Texas Rangers. And if you go down in the left-hand column where it says C, the Sal family genealogy, those are the two first cousins that married. Araminta Adeline Sal and James Asa Jimmy Sal. And they had Rosie. Rosie just lived to be, 21 or 22 years old when she died. But she had given birth to my grandmother, Lily and Ollie, or who you older ones called Ganny. And she's the one that her tombstone was broken in half. Major William Sutterth Turner was a buddy of Andrew Jackson. And he was a major in the War of 1812, and he was on Andrew Jackson's personal staff. So we have that neat connection to Andrew Jackson, whatever you think of old Andy. It's kind of a neat deal to have someone of your grandfathers who was on Andrew Jackson's personal staff. The next thing I put there is our grandparents who are buried in San Geronimo Cemetery. All of these are your grandparents. John Newton, Elizabeth Nichols, Asa, Mary, Jimmy, Araminta, Rosie, Sarah, William, Elizabeth, they're all buried right there together. And I can't think of anyone that I've ever come across that has, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 grandparents buried right together. But you do. And if you ever get to the San Geronimo Cemetery, go by and look at the memorials that the Texas Rangers have put up, and the state of Texas has put up 2 gigantic monuments to the Sal brothers. And it's a pretty impressive thing. And then I tried to list all of our family that's buried in San Geronimo, and I hope I haven't left anyone else. But your granddad, my Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Ella, Opaldine, J.P., Louise, Edward are all buried in that same cemetery. And I hope I've not left anyone off. And I don't want to add any more names, okay? So if you're planning on leaving us, we'll add your name, of course. Okay, the next page is the Steele genealogy. And the third one down in the left column, Hardin Steele was the Texas Ranger. And his son, Henry David Steele, was the famous trail driver of Texas. Have you ever heard of the 2-volume series called The Trail Drivers of Texas? You need to get that book if you don't have it. It tells stories of dozens of trail drivers who went from Chisholm Trail through Texas and Oklahoma up to the train depots in Kansas. And our great-great-grandfather, Henry David Steele, has a story in there that he wrote about his trail driving experiences. He went on to Wyoming and Montana and other places driving cattle. And it was his daughter, Rosie, who died so young when our grandmother, my grandmother, was just a year and a half old. Let's see now. Let's go to the Tanner genealogy, and we'll see how Mike and Gwen are cousins. Our Tanners are a very interesting family. Jonathan Tanner came to Lockhart and was considered to be a prominent man there. He was a wheelwright and a carpenter. And he was murdered in his shop in an argument with a fellow who was one of his customers. He's the first man murdered in Lockhart, which may or may not be of any significance to you. But I've written some articles about the murder that took place there in Lockhart. Now, he had a wife named Betsy. And all of a sudden, Betsy disappears from the family in all the records. And for years, I had no idea if Betsy died or what happened to her. Well, I finally found out she left the family for another man. This is our grandmother. And she married a Texas Ranger named William Riley Huckabee, who had a son who was captured by the Indians. And there's a book written with his story in it, A Fate Worse Than Death. And if you happen to have an opportunity to buy this or look at it, not the whole book is about him, but one of the chapters is about him being captured by the Indians and the opportunity he had to go back to his family, and he chose to stay with the Indians. And he became a semi-famous Indian. He was called the White Indian. But he is our uncle because she gave birth to him with another man. But he's still our uncle. And his whole story, in fact, I copied it off if anyone would like to have that. But it's pretty interesting. In those days, lots of white kids, male and female, were captured by the Indians and became Indian slaves. But this boy became an Indian warrior. And he went by the name of T-E-H-A-N. And he was captured by the Kiowas. And he became a pretty famous warrior, but he was known as the White Indian. And so there is that story. And then we'll get to the Young family. Since all of us are descendants of the Youngs. None of the Youngs were Texas Rangers. But one of the cousins was a Texas Ranger scout over in Live Oak County. And so I kind of count him as a Texas Ranger, but he was too young to actually be enrolled as a Texas Ranger, but he was their scout over in Live Oak County. Our connection here in the Young family is to Baptist preachers. Jesse Young was a Baptist preacher in South Carolina and Mississippi. Richard Young, who was the first one to come to Texas, established Baptist churches in Lockhart and Luling, and then they moved up to Johnson County, and he established Baptist churches in that county. And then his son, who we call Kit, went off to the Civil War and died of some sickness, typhoid, I think. And his son, J.V. Young, searched and searched for his daddy's grave, but never could find it. But that's our Young connection to Texas, which happened, I believe, 1848 is when the Youngs came here from Louisiana. And so this might be the most important one for you to put your information in, where number 7 is, for my dad, is where Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Ella would go. Then you go in at number 8, your kids at number 9, and so forth. So if you want to do your Young genealogy first, but that might be the best sheet to start with. And just start at number 7 and make the changes to your grandfather's name. What I've done on the next page is, are just miscellaneous notes about the different members of the Young family and their part in history and where they fit in. And as I say, this is just a preliminary work that I'm putting together into a book. And then we get to the picture section. I want you to see what our ancestors look like. The first picture there of Andy Sal is our uncle, who was the Alamo Courier. And that's his brother next to him, who is our great-great-grandfather, Mayor of Seguin and Judge and Sheriff. I made this picture under Andy Sal over at the Alamo that shows that he was one of the heroes of the Alamo. And he's listed as a courier. And that picture of me is made at the Gonzales Cemetery. I was talking to someone one day about my Sal ancestors being in Gonzales County, and he said, well, mine were too. I said, well, what was your ancestor's name? He said, Matthew Caldwell. And I said, did you know he's buried right next to my grandfather? So it was just a total coincidence, because they live in Phoenix, Arizona, and here we were talking, and our grandfathers are buried next to one another. His grandfather got the big stone, because he has a county named after him. And our grandfather has the smaller stone because we just didn't have the money to buy a big stone. Yes.
If I remember right, Andrew Jackson Sal, was he named that?
He was named after President Jackson.
Did his wife assist in his birth? Andrew Jackson's wife assisted in AJ's birth.
Yes, that is the story, that Andrew Jackson's wife was one of the midwives when he was born.
Okay,
And that she chose his name.
gotcha.
If that's myth or legend or actual truth, I don't know, but that has
It's
been
stuck in my
in
mind.
our family.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, it does sound good. The next page has at the top left there, the monument in Gonzales to the old 18. And you see a John Sal name is listed there. Below that, there is no picture of our grandfather, John Newton Sal, that anyone has ever found. So I just put in my application for him to get a memorial cross from the Texas Rangers. At the top of the next column there, the fellow that's numbered number 5, that is Jimmy Sal. He is our great-grandfather, and the other guys there are his first cousins. There's a lot of double cousins in the Young family. And below that is a business card of P.S. Sal, who was the attorney for the heirs of John Wesley Hardin. Any of you ever heard of John Wesley Hardin?
Oh, yeah.
Well, he wrote a biography that got published because our Uncle Sal was the attorney for his children who saw that book got published. And he lived and died in Seguin, and I'm pretty proud of him. On the next page, I put in another picture of Come and Take It mural. Below that is Company A of the Texas Rangers with A.J. Sal. Below that are the graves at San Geronimo. And then the 2 pictures in the right-hand column are our Uncle Jack Sal. He's the one who wrote all the books. Rangers and Pioneers of Texas, Early Settlers of Texas, Life of Bigfoot Wallace. And he is our most famous Texas Ranger for 2 reasons. Anytime someone writes a book about Texas Rangers, they use one of these 2 pictures. You can be walking in Barnes and Noble and look, and there's Uncle Jack on the front of a book about Texas Rangers or somewhere in there. And he's buried over at Center Point. And by the way, Center Point Cemetery has more Texas Rangers buried in that cemetery than any other cemetery in Texas. I think there's 15 or more Texas Rangers buried over at Center Point. Now on the next page is a picture of Bigfoot Wallace in his old age. Since our Uncle Jack wrote his biography, they became good friends. And that picture was saved. Back in those days, they had what they called glass negatives. And this glass negative cracked, or we wouldn't even have this picture at all of the two of them together. But if you are interested, you can buy the book, Life of Bigfoot Wallace by A.J. Sowell. And there is a copy of the original title page that he used when he submitted that book for publication. And the Daughters of the Revolution of Texas have that in their library. The young man that is there is our grandfather, Jimmy, who is considered the blacksmith of Seguin. And then I went to an auction and bought a funeral card for A.J. Sowell, just as kind of a souvenir to have. The next page is dedicated to our Tumlinson family. There are no pictures of the original two Tumlinsons who were Texas Rangers, but one of these is the son of one of them, and the other one is the son of the other one. And then they had a brother, George, who died at the Alamo. And this little plaque is just honoring all of the Alamo dead. And your Uncle George is one of the heroes of the Alamo that died. His dad established Fort Tumlinson. Some of you live near Leander. This monument's up at Leander. That's where Fort Tumlinson was before Leander was there. And he built a block house for the Texas Rangers that he was in charge of. And below that is a picture of the grave of the woman that got me started on this Tumlinson journey, Mahalia. And she married a man with the strange name of King Cyrus Alexander Park. They called him Cy, but he liked to go around being called King. Anyway, he's buried over at Perryville. The next page has some of our grandparents and members of the Tanner family. Major Turner, he's the one that was on Andrew Jackson's staff. And that's his daughter, Mary Mildred, who married into the Sowell family. And she had a brother who was a Texas Ranger named Calvin Turner. He's buried over at Pleasanton. And then the newspaper article there is about our great-great-grandfather being murdered. But it sounds like the guy who wrote this thinks he thought he needed to be murdered. I don't know the circumstances. His wife had already left him and run off with another Texas Ranger, but all the children stayed with him. So I don't know whether he was a good guy or a bad guy, but anyway, this article makes it look like if someone was going to be killed, it might as well have been him. And then that's his son who became the mayor of Brownwood, and then his son who was a Texas Ranger. And on the next page is our Uncle Sam Tanner, who was a Texas Ranger but killed a man at Fredericksburg and went to Huntsville being charged with murder. I don't know which of the Tanner boys that is there on the horse, but someone gave me that picture and said that's one of our Tanner uncles. The old fellow that is there, James Wilson Nichols, he's the one who wrote this journal that I'm going to wrap up here with a minute and read one of his stories. And then I got a picture of the fellow that our grandmother ran off with, his grave. The next page is our Texas Ranger, our old trail driver, my great-grandfather, Henry David Steele. And Uncle Jimmy, your grandfather, said that's Teddy Roosevelt's horse that he's sitting on. Another one of my uncles said, no, that's Will Rogers' horse that he's sitting on. But anyway, that's your grandfather Steele. And the picture below that is so dim, he was getting ready to go on a cattle drive to Kansas, Wyoming, and Montana, and they made his picture out there on the horse. Then the Richard Young below that, that's our first Young to come to Texas. And he's the one who married the full-blood German woman, whose story I had back there in those notes. I'll just tell you a little bit about her. She and her mama and daddy and little brother were immigrating to America, and her mom and dad died on the ship. When she and her little brother arrived in New York Harbor, they had no family, no one they knew, and they started walking the streets. They had no food, no money, nothing. A kind family wanted our grandmother, Catherine, and took her, adopted her, and moved with her to Mississippi, where she married our grandfather, Richard. We have no idea what happened to her little brother. We never saw her little brother again. And why the family didn't take both of them, I don't know. But her story is in one of those earlier pages. At the top of the right-hand column is our great-grandfather, Hardin Steele, our great-grandmother, Melinda Tanner. He was the Texas Ranger, and the little boy standing in the back row with his mother's arm around him, that's the trail driver, Henry David Steele. And then John Duncan Young, who was the Texas Ranger Scout, was the son of Richard's brother Levi, who was a Texas Baptist circuit rider. Have any of you ever heard the name J. Frank Dobie? His first book, and he wrote 50 books, his first book was called The Vaquero of the Brush Country, which is the story of the life of John Duncan Young. So if you want to read about our Young
Memoirs
family.
of John Young?
Pardon?
Memoirs of John Young?
No, it's called The Vaquero of the Brush Country.
Well, there was one of the books about John Young that my dad bought at one of our family auctions.
Yes,
And I still have it, and I didn't know if
it's that book.
it's that book.
Vaquero over Brush Country. And J. Frank Dobie was a professor at the University of Texas, but his first 2 years he taught high school in Alpine, where John Young lived, and he wrote the biography of John Young called Vaquero of the Brush Country. The next page is our oldest Young ancestor, who was alive when photography first started in the 1840s. And this picture is so old and dim, I'm surprised that it looks that good. But that's our oldest Young ancestor that I was able to find a picture of. And he was a very highly thought of Baptist preacher in Mississippi. The next page is his son, Kit Young, who died in the Civil War, and his wife, Frances Ann. When he went off to war, he begged his next younger brother, "If I die in the war, will you marry my wife?" He dies, she marries his brother. And together she had about 14 children. A bunch by both.
From both brothers?
By both brothers.
Yeah. There we go again.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're all mixed up. The next page is the old trail driver, Henry David Steele, and his young wife, Rosie, who died when she was 21 years old, my grandmother's mother. That's a tintype, very difficult to make a copy of, but that's my great-great-grandmother, your great-great-great-grandmother, who's buried there with the broken tombstone that I've had repaired. The next page is my great-grandfather, Jack Young, they called him JV, and Fred Young, my grandfather, is the little boy right in the middle of the picture. And he's the one that you older kids called Papa. Sandy and Debbie remember him as Papa Young. That's him when he was a little boy.
I've seen this picture.
Isn't that great? I love that picture. The next, I just came on down with another generation. That's my grandparents, your great-grandparents, Fred and Lily. He went by Fred and she went by Lily. And she had a aunt named Ollie is how she got Ollie, but how he got Orlando, I've never figured out. There's no one in the family named Orlando. But anyway, that's Papa and Gammy Young, for those who are old enough to remember them. And Mike and Karen, y'all used to live in their house. There on Olive Street. Yeah, when he got tuberculosis, he was a farmer. They lived at Stockdale for years, where most of the kids were raised. They moved into Seguin in 1951 or 52, and later on, you guys lived in that house.
And you always had a pack of juicy fruit gum on you.
Yeah, juicy fruit gun. Oh, he died the same day President Kennedy died, November 22nd, 1963. He had gone to that famous Dukenaires in Seguin and was in there shopping and died, and she was sitting out in the car. For how long, we don't know. Someone figured out to call Opaldine, because everybody knew Opaldine. And she came and found Ganny sitting out in the car after several hours, the poor little thing. But that's my grandparents. The next page is my mother and dad, and I put that there because that's where you're going to want to put your grandparents' picture when you do this for yourself. And by the way, your grandfather, Uncle Jimmy, was my dad's best man at that wedding. The next page is the young children. From left to right, Uncle David, who married Aunt Ella's sister, Clyde, and that's why your parents are double cousins with his children. Then Uncle Boyd, those men were both bankers in San Antonio. Then your grandfather, my Uncle Jimmy. Then Aunt Ann, who has two children over at Baytown, who didn't come today, unfortunately. Then Maggie J. Ella May, who died at the age of 18 after she had given the valedictory address at Stockdale High School. You may have heard this story. She was the red-haired one. Maggie was the brunette, Ann was the blonde. My three children were blonde, redhead, and brunette. People always kidded us about that, but those three girls were all three different hair colors. Anyway, Ella May was the valedictorian at Stockdale. She was 18 and she gave her speech. She came out and sat down by her class sponsor, laid her head over and just died.
Were these the musical family?
Yes.
Okay.
And in this book that I wrote a number of years ago, I have a picture of all of them with their instruments. I wrote this book in '95, and all of you who are the grandchildren of Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Ella, your names are in here, but I don't have all your husbands and wives' names and all your children's names because I wrote this in 1995. But if you want to look at it, there's lots of pictures of your parents and grandparents in that book.
So the book that you're writing now, are names that
No. Then I put pictures of my three sons. That's where you'll put pictures of, because they're your cousins. Jimmy Faye and I are in the generation where your moms and dads were. So we're all first cousins. And you're my first cousin once removed. Your children are my first cousins twice removed, and so on. But my three boys are your second cousins, if you know how that all works out. So you're looking at your second cousins there with my three sons, who would be embarrassed if they knew that all these years later I'm still showing their senior pictures. Then the next page is where I put Charlotte and I, and that's where you'd put your mom and dad. And then the next one down is my grandchildren. I have 8 grandchildren, 7 boys and 1 girl. She's not spoiled at all. And then the next page features Michael Jones. who was the ring bearer in our wedding 56 years ago. And there's little Michael down on the front row, next to my little brother. And so I just put that in there so that you would know Michael had reached the pinnacle of his career early.
And I did have hair at the time.
Did have hair. Before I read one story, any questions? Or I went through that really fast, but I hope that it was something that'll be meaningful to you.
I noticed that AJ died on July 4th, the 4th of July, but I can't read the year.
1926 or so, I believe.
Now, Papa died on the March sixth,
Yes.
the Alamo,
Same day as the Alamo fell.
yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
I remember the funeral.
Yes.
And who was standing up and yelled something about the Alamo at the funeral?
Oh, I forgot about that, Terry.
No.
It was at his funeral that someone stood up and said, "Remember the Alamo."
Johnny.
I was there, but I can't remember who that guy was, but it was.
Sounds like something Uncle Johnny would do.
It could have been Johnny. It could have been your husband.
Typical. Yeah, that's where I put my money.
The old blacksmith shop in Seguin, it was kind of a lean-to, and I remember it growing up, and that was our relative's blacksmith shop.
Yes, and I've got a picture of it in this book. Some of your parents bought this book when I wrote it in '95 in that original.
There's a lady in Seguin who is related, she bought that old hotel, and I'm friends with her on Facebook, and she publishes old pictures once or twice a week. And for a while, she was looking for pictures of that old blacksmith shop.
Okay.
And at the time, I didn't even realize that was a relative.
Yeah, that was your grandfather's blacksmith
Yeah.
shop.
It was there for many, after I was an adult.
Well, I do have a picture of it if she still wants it.
Where was that located?
The corner of Water Street and.
I got it.
I can't remember, but it was on the south side of Seguin. Pretty prominent location, which is now all built up with business. Court and Water Street, yeah.
Well, I lived in Fort.
Okay. That, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that blacksmith shop stood there for many years. He was the first blacksmith in Seguin.
Now, is that the book my mom would have had?
No, not this one. She would have had this one. Now, I hate to stand here in front of Texas winning this ball game. But it's
Stand in front of it if they're losing.
They are.
No, it's the same.
Oh.
You're better off, yeah.
No, I want them to win every other game so that OU will play them again in the Big 12
You
championship.
know,
Then we can lose.
you barely won.
Yes, but
Again.
on paper, it goes down as a win. It doesn't say barely.
I count your sales.
If you get a chance to buy this book, it also comes in a paperback version that's $20 at Barnes & Noble or anywhere. Now You Hear My Horn. It's the softcover version of this one here, and it is stories about our ancestors. And I just want to read one story to you to give you a feel for what early Texas was like. That I will start laughing here in just a minute, because this guy tells this story about our grandfather in such a humorous way, and he probably didn't think it was funny at all. But anyway, while you're watching the game, you can listen to this. In these early days, there were no mills to grind corn. That article so scarce, there was not much use for mills. And the nearest mill was Grassmeyer's on the Colorado River, distant near 70 miles, and only a few steel hand mills. It was understood that there was plenty of meal to sell at the meal and mill. So father, that's the Nichols father who married our Sal's grandmother, and old man Sal and 2 or 3 others made up money to buy a load of meal, and father agreed to furnish the wagon and 1 yoke of oxen and a driver if others would furnish money to buy his meal, and they agreed. Old man Sal, who is the guy who did the cannon, they always referred to him as the old man. He died when he was 56 years old. I'm 76, so I don't want to be called old man. Old man Sal agreed to furnish so much money, 1 yoke of oxen and a boy to help drive and for company, and it was agreed that myself and Asa Sal would go. Now, Asa is your great-grandfather who had a brother who married the 2 cousins, you know. We rolled out one morning, no sign of a road at all. This is written in his language. No road at all to travel the whole way, our oxen fat and unruly, and the first day powerful hot. We went on and crossed Peach Creek about 4 o'clock, and there we rested about 1 hour, and not knowing where we would get water next, we watered our steers, filled up our gourds, and started. They didn't have Yeti back in those days. It was cool that evening, and we traveled fast and got about 8 miles from the creek, came to a brushy ridge, could not see how to pick our way through, and camped, hobbled out our oxen, eat our suppers, and went to sleep. Next morning, my oxen was in sight, but the others we could not see. But I told Asa to go around and take a look for them while I made some coffee, and he'd taken a big round but found no oxen. And he came in, and while he was eating, I told him I would take a round. I thought I could find the trail and soon trail them up. Directly I struck their trail and could trail them easily as the grass was high, and I trotted on the trail about 2 miles and found their hobbles, and I knew then they was gone a long way. Then I thought, Asa was young and scary, and I better go back and get him so we could be together if anything should happen, as we never knew when there was danger. I went back to the wagon and found Asa nearly scared to death, as he had heard a gunfire in the direction and thought I had gone, and he thought the Indians had attacked me, and I had stayed away so long that they had killed me, and he was terrible uneasy. We then tied up my oxen, taken our guns and gourds, then nearly empty, and struck out on the trail of the oxen through the country nearly due north. And we followed on the trail till about sundown, when Asa said he would have to rest. He said he was awful hungry. And while he was resting, I walked around to see if I could find a squirrel, a rabbit, or a bird, for I was hungry too. And neither of us had ate anything since early morning, but could find nothing to shoot. And after traveling until dark, we camped out, but could still find nothing to shoot. Next morning, we resumed our journey and went on until near 2 o'clock in the evening, when we came to a large trail about 2 days and nights old. I examined it and found out it had been Indians with a large drove of horses, and there we lost the trail of our oxen. But we crossed the Indian trail and found our oxen trail, and at the same time found where the Indians had killed a buffalo and had cut some pieces out of it, but the buzzards and wolves had picked the bones clean. We went on a mile or 2 farther and found a buffalo that the Indians had wounded and had straggled off and died. It was now about 4 o'clock in the evening, the second day out from the wagon, and we are now out of water and fearful hungry. I may start laughing. We concluded to try a piece of the buffalo meat, but it was terribly swelled, being dead about 3 days, and nights in the hot weather, and I knew it would be short. But hunger knows no difference in tainted or short meat and good meat. I cut a hunk and smelled it, and woo, it smelled like ripe peaches. We pitched in and we roasted and eat until we was loaded down to our heels, and Asa put a hunk in his pocket. That counted for game being so scarce as all kinds of game were run for miles from an Indian trail. We went on trailing our oxen for a few miles farther, and we both began to get awful thirsty, but still kept on until Asa gave out. Now he's just a teenage boy. And I was nearing the same fix, and he's about 20. And we sat down and rested a while, and then went on, and soon came to a deep beaten trail, and I told Asa that trail led to water. We quit the oxen trail and followed the oat trail through a low, flat post-oat country, with the prospect good for a long walk. But fortunately for us, we were soon stuck in a deep creek. It's dry, by the way. The trail led up the bed of the creek, and we followed up the creek a half mile and found water, and behold, there stood our oxen. After drinking and resting, and then resting and drinking, we filled our gourds, catched our oxen, and started for the wagon at least 18 miles, and the sun only about 1 hour high. We traveled about 2 miles when Asa said he was sick and laid down, and I tied the oxen to a tree and went back to where he was, and he commenced to throw up. And he heaved it up from about 2 pounds of buffalo meat and a sluice of water, and then some more meat and water mixed. He lay still a few seconds, then heaved up some more buffalo meat and water, then taken another drink of water, and by this time it was dark, and Asa had emptied his gourd, and I had taken 2 drinks out of mine, and I began to study the situation. My oxen at the wagon tied up 2 days and a night with a prospect good for 1 more night, another day, without water or grass, and me, then at least 15 miles from them with an awful sick companion. And I reached over and felt his pulse, and he had a high fever. After laying there a few minutes, he woke up and asked for water, and I handed him my gourd, his being empty. He drank it empty and lay down again, but soon raised up and heaved again. And up comes some more meat and water, and then some more water thickened with buffalo meat. And oh, such a perfume. You would have said, well, that man ought to have been buried a week ago. He laid down and was soon sound asleep, and I lay down but could not sleep, and in about an hour, Asa woke up and asked for water, and I told him there was not a drop in either gourd. He laid down and groaned, oh Lordy, but did not lay long before he raised up and commenced throwing water thickened with meat, and then some buffalo meat with water. This guy writes beautifully. When he threw up everything, only what belonged inside of him, he lay down again and lay still about an hour, and then roused up and said, water, water, oh for God's sake, a little water. It was a groundhog case, and I knew in the fix he was in, he was bound to have water or die before morning. I says, Asa, if you promise me that you won't die till I get back, I will go and get you some water as dark as it is. He said he would try, so I scanned around the place to see if I would know it again in the dark. And just then the thought struck me to build a fire. And I could see it a long ways. But there was a great drawback. The grass was tall and dry. I looked around and found a tolerable naked place and scraped away the grass best I could with my butcher knife and built a small fire and started. I took the trail that we had traveled the evening before, made it to the creek pretty well, but found it very dark in the bed of the creek and groped my way up to the water, filled both gourds, and struck out for camp. I made it within sight, and the light blinded me so I could hardly travel at all, and I had not discovered the cause of so much light, but when I arrived in about 80 yards, I saw a new difficulty had arose. While I was gone, the wind sprang up and had blown some small coals and sparks into the grass, and it was burning at a fearful rate. Asa, oh, where was he? He was not dead by about 36 years. And he did live to become the mayor of Seguin. And was up fighting fire like he was killing snakes a dime a dozen, where they was plentiful. I ran as fast as I could and pitched in to save the oxen and fought hard and tried to fire against it, but it was no go. The wind was too high and the fire ran under the oxen, and they reared and pitched and tried to break the rope, but that was no go as they had to take the chance. The fire burned under them and singed all their hair off their legs and bellies, so that in a few days the hide fell in pieces or patches the size of a saddle blanket or a mule's ear, whatever that means. But again to my mutton. After I found that the fire had outrun me and I got away, I hollowed for Asa, but could not raise him. And I went in search of him and hunted and hollowed and hunted in vain. I went back to where we had first stopped, where I had left the gourds, and began to muse thus. Well, while I was away, Asa died and wolves dragged him off. Or the fire has burned him over and blackened him so I cannot see him in the dark and dense smoke. But I kept walking around trying to recognize the place where I left him, all the time peering through the smoke and darkness. Not far from the gourds, I saw him lying flat on his face, and I thought, just as I expected, dead by granny. I love this guy's writing. But going up to him, I found him still breathing. He had left the fight into the fire and started to see if I had come back, got that far and fell exhausted in a fainting fit. I ran, got a gourd of water, and wet his face and head and poured some in his mouth, took my handkerchief, wet it, and put it on his breast, and kept pouring water on him until I emptied one gourd, but he was still unconscious. I must have worked with him 1 hour, and he opened his eyes and looked around sort of wild, and I says, Asa, here is some water, don't you want to drink? He raised up and drank and says, oh, where are we? Oh, Lordy, and lay down again. After taking the second drink, he lay down and was soon snoring gloriously, and I lay down, but there was no sleep for me. I lay there studying what an eventful trip we had had, and it not half over, and wished myself back at home under my mammy's bed cracking peanuts. I was lying there studying these things until about an hour before day, I heard a gang of wolves there loose, howling not 40 yards distant. And I jumped up and went for my gun, the first time I had thought of it since I had returned from the water, and oh cracky, it was of course not there. I awoke Asa and asked him about our guns, and he said when the fire broke out, he snatched up both guns, draped the shot pouch straps around them and hung them up in a tree and pointed to the tree. Now I had heard some fearful yarns about wolves attacking people, and it made me feel sort of spotted behind the ears, whatever that means. And I got the guns down and was so glad it made me say to Asa, bully for your sore toe if it never gets well, whatever that means. By this time, Asa had staggered to his feet and took his gun. The wolves kept coming and howling until they got within 15 steps of us. We both fixed ourselves to shoot at the same time, and if they still advanced on us, we were to take a stooping tree which stood close by, and when they got close enough, we both fired, and both killed his wolf, and the others ran off. We went and dragged them up into camp, taken out their livers, roasted them, and ate them. By this time, day had begun to break, and we started for the wagon and made it back about 1 o'clock, and my oxen looked, well, I can hardly describe them. Well, they looked like I don't want to mispronounce this, Shitepoke. And I looked that word up, and it is a flock of herons, but it looks like Shitepoke. I had to look it up because I couldn't figure out what he's talking about. And so after, they looked like a heron after swallowing a live eel a dozen times and could not make him stick. Not knowing where we would find the next water, after eating a hump of bread and bacon, we hitched up and started. We had a fine-looking team to start with, one yoke half roasted, and the other so gaunt they could hardly make a shadow, that we went on all the same and happened to strike water a little before sundown and camped for the night. By this time, Asa was all right, and I teased him a little bit about the fire getting out the night before. And I told him I knew that when I left for water, that he spread the coals out to roast his hump of buffalo meat, that he had put in his pocket to eat. And the fire broke out that way, but he said that hunk got to stinking so bad he threw it away. And that night I enjoyed a good night's sleep. Well, this book is just full of stories about our grandparents and our Sal and Nichols family. And if you can order one off of Amazon in the hardcover or the softcover, I think you'll find lots of good stories in there about the Sals and the Nichols.
Roy, have you listed the various books that you recommend reading?
If you're wanting to read more about your family, besides this, this journal of the Nichols family, you want to get Rangers and Pioneers of Texas by A.J. Sal, and Early Settlers and Indian Fighters of Southwest Texas. And those are the two that have the most history of the Sal family in them.
Well, I was looking through various books and referring to, including these right here. Just want those, like, would you listed these, or can you send them out to us?
You can order these on Amazon or ABE Books or Bookfinder.com. And if you don't remember the names of the books, just type in A.J. Sal, and those books will come up. And this one is James Wilson Nichols. But we are so fortunate and so blessed to have had this deep history in Texas and so many books written about our ancestors. It's just kind of an amazing thing that we have had that blessing. Yeah, just a second. This book that I wrote back in '95, if you would like to look at your family in here, I know all of you cousins are in here, but some of you weren't married at that time and didn't have children or grandchildren at that time. But if you haven't seen this book on the history of the Young family in Texas, you are in this book, and you're welcome to look at it. I'm sold out of them. I made 200 of them, and they sold out real quickly, and I haven't reissued it.
You're not gonna reissue? Or is this?
That's about 10 years worth of work, and I just haven't had the energy to update it, print it
Is that what
again.
this one you use for, to get everybody's information?
Well, yeah, hopefully. Can I answer any questions? Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you.
We would like to get some pictures with your cell phones, and certainly all the cousins and spouses and children and grandchildren. And Karen, I don't know where would be the best place to do that, but
Well, we could do it outside, we could do it in here. You tell me where you want to